This Euranet Plus debate presented within the Citizens Corner concept. The debate is produced and hosted by Euranet Plus and Castilla y Leon Radio, a member of the Euranet Plus network. Today we discuss European crime and victims' rights in Europe. What happens if you're a victim of crime in another member state? What are your rights? What access to justice will you receive? What access to support, to medical care? The debate can be followed live from the European Parliament on our Euranet Plus Inside website, on our Facebook profile, as well as on Twitter. Users can comment, share, react, and interact. Joining us today, Malin Björk, a member of the European Parliament from Sweden. She sits with the European United Left. Helgard van Hüllen, Vice President of Victim Support Europe, welcome. Maggie Hughes from the United Kingdom, a leading victims' rights campaigner. And joining us by telephone from Vienna, Dr. Albin Dearing, a legal expert with the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. We're also joined by students from our campus radio network. Javier Rodriguez from the University of Vigo in Spain, Radu Sagan from Romania also. Thank you and welcome to all of you. Maggie, let's start with you. Your son was brutally beaten while on holiday in Greece. And what happened next?
The first thing we got was a phone call from one of the three young men that was actually with my son. It was very vague in between information because they were obviously worried of the condition of my son and leaving him for more than 5 minutes. They were, and they didn't want to let us think it was worse than what it was. Eventually, we decided to get on a plane because whatever information we was getting didn't sound right. So we arrived in Greece. First thing that hit us, we couldn't speak the language. We eventually found the hospital and eventually found where my son was, but the condition he was in was a condition that I knew immediately we wasn't going home. But we was only prepared at that moment for a weekend stay. So that's when our nightmare began.
So from what I understand, you didn't have access to the proper legal facilities, the medical facilities, consular support from the Foreign Office wasn't great. And after that, when your son made some progress and some recovery, there was a prosecution of the 4 men that attacked him. What happened with the prosecution?
Originally, it was 6. We went to trial in 2012 after going through all the courts in London because the suspects all had to be extradited. Eventually, we got the last one extradited, I think in 2011, and in 2012, we went to court. After a lengthy court case, they were 4 were found guilty, 2 were released.
And they were sent straight to prison?
No. They were actually sent straight back home to the UK to enjoy their lives like they always had done.
And they were entitled to legal services?
I can't answer that because obviously I don't know them, their ins and outs of what they do. But I can honestly tell you, our family has totally and utterly struggled, even with an insurance cover.
Okay, Malin Björk, is this something you hear from your constituents? Problems of accessing justice, healthcare overseas when there's a crime committed against them?
Well, I think as politicians we do hear regular citizens' problems in different areas, and the area of crime is one of them, of course. And I think the European Union has been concentrating a lot on prosecuting criminals and working in crime fighting. But for us from the left side, we think that supporting protection and compensation for victims is the other and necessary side of the coin, and this is, I think, what is positive with this the new piece of legislation from 2012 that actually is there to support and protect victims and their families.
Okay, Helga, you represent victim support in Europe. What are the common scenarios that you face?
That's what Maggie described. That you don't know where to go. For example, in Greece, it's very difficult to find the right institutions to get some support. Then the support in every country might be different, and that's why it's so important to have minimum standards where you can rely on that it's equal in all the countries, though it will in future also be different still, because you have the different culture, a different approach. But the standard must be a minimum standard so that you get support and and that's important, where to go, whom you have to address to get support.
Do we have Albin, can you hear us? Not just at the moment. Okay, let's come back to Albin in just a moment. Hi. Hi, Albin. Thanks for joining us.
Pick the phone now. Hello.
So let's talk about the legal structure. What's the framework for victim support in Europe when a European citizen suffers a crime?
Well, the framework is very different, actually, and the Victims Directive makes it very clear that there is more than one path in establishing victim support services. What I think one has to consider is how important it is that there's some support available to victims, because otherwise the right of victims to have access to justice is only theoretical. It becomes only practical if there is someone that informs and supports and advises victims. So it's important that a victim who is victimized in another member state can rely on certain minimum standards being met wherever they travel.
And what's the legislative framework for that? Is there a one law that governs the whole of the European Union in terms of minimum standards?
Actually, there's not even a law in each member state. It is a matter of organization, and we see that sometimes it's the state that sets up a structure that is then official, and more often it's an NGO that takes care of that. In some member states, it's based on voluntary work. In Estonia, for instance, it's 100% work that is conducted by official staff. Sometimes it is quite a strong generic victim support service, like is the case in Germany. In other cases, you have a split between some specialized NGOs dealing with certain areas of crime and the generic support service. So there are very different models, and all of them can work.
Okay. You have a question for Maggie, I think.
Yes. I would like to know what we as citizens can do to improve these victims' rights.
Well, you can, of course, contribute by voluntary work to victim support services everywhere.
Great. Albin, let's hear from Maggie. Maggie, you were speaking about a common sense approach we spoke earlier.
Yeah, I can only take you back to, how I dealt with a lot of problems. For instance, I'll take one out of the hat. After about 2 to 3 weeks, things you don't check on, especially when you've got somebody that you're being told could die at any moment, you're concentrating on that. But in the meantime, all my family were ringing everywhere trying to get help and assistance, but all on our mobile phones. Now, the problem with that was when we went to check it, because I just sat there and all of a sudden I thought, I better check my mobile and make sure, I haven't run over anything. Well, I was looking at just mine alone of £980. And that was in 3 weeks. I mean, you think, no, there's no way you can run up a bill like that, but you can. And what I done was, believe it or not, I actually phoned my mobile phone company, and as you do, you're trying to ask them to help you, but then they're saying, well, how are you proposing to pay for this? Well, I must have picked on the right person, because the very next day that lady phoned me back. She did nothing but apologise, and I don't know why, but she said, I've just looked up on the internet and realised that you're in a serious situation and I think we can help you. And believe it or not, that mobile phone company wiped my phone bill clean, wiped 3 of my other family members' phone bills clean, and then she became the liaison officer to my family from that company and took care of us until we stepped foot back on the United Kingdom's ground.
Malin, is this a moment where we talk about Europe for its citizens and we talk about a single market and all these things, but when there's a crisis, it doesn't really join up very well. Is this a moment where the European Parliament can push for some sort of concrete action for victim support across Europe?
Well, I think that, as our colleague via the phone said, the European legislators have put in place a directive that gives the big shapes of what victim support and protection should look like in the European Union. And with that as a basis, it is up for the member states to fulfill those criteria and those obligations laid down there. And it's quite clear when it comes to both access to justice, information, support to the family, and that also family members are considered to be victims of crime. That was something new in this new piece of legislation from the European Union. I do think that, as was said here earlier, there are different systems in place nationally. This should also be respected, because I'm not one of those that think that the European Union does everything better or has one model fits all.
Okay.
But the minimum rights level are there now, and it's really up for us also to follow up and see that these are implemented in a way that really address the needs formulated by victim support organizations.
Albin, is this enforceable, or is this a wish list of things which should be done?
Well, it is first of all a directive that needs to be implemented by member states by end of next year, and I see that many member states are now really active in passing legislation that needs to be passed, in setting up structures that are missing when it comes to effective implementation of legislation and so on. So definitely the directive is a huge step ahead.
Okay.
I think we should all appreciate that and now wait for member states to really meet the targets.
Marlon, sorry, Helga.
I would like to add, it's not a reason to take the crisis as a reason not to spend money, because in the end you save money. If you help victims to come over this dreadful situation, be able to work again, to be able to fulfill and have their daily life again, that saves money for workplace and health insurance and everything. So in the end, I don't think that's a good argument to say the crisis.
Maggie mentioned about insurance companies as well. Our insurance policies that we take, and they talk about 5 million in health cover and legal costs as well, are they worth anything? These kind of insurance policies we take if we go on holiday?
It depends the contract you have with this health insurance. Some are really good, and you really have to have a closer look. And everybody should do that before you go in a foreign country.
Maggie, what was your experience with your insurance?
Well, you want me to be honest?
Yeah.
Absolutely diabolical at the beginning, I must admit. We had nothing but bad advice, bad information, and even on the first weekend we arrived, we arrived on the Friday, I think it was, and on the Sunday our tickets had run out. And I contacted the insurance company, and they just said, "Oh, go round and find a hotel, and you pay, and maybe we'll reimburse you later on along the line." And I said, "But we're not going anywhere. My son's on a life support machine. He may not live. He may die." "Well, yeah. Will you come back to us when you got in a hotel?" We did go back to them that evening after finding a hotel, which was very, very reasonable, and they were closed.
Okay.
So again, things like that should be, there should be something in place where, you're talking about serious crime abroad. You're not talking about somebody that's missed their flight.
Have you?
There is any way to improve this? I mean, like any legislation to improve this of the insurance, from the insurance to the customers, to the society, citizens?
You see, Albin, we have a big disconnect between the high level of European policy and the daily experience of citizens. Are we getting any closer to resolving these issues?
Yes, true. We have a disconnect between the right of every individual victim to have access to justice and the number of victims who actually arrive at experiencing justice. And I think
give some figures on the statistics on the victims of justice, victims who can't access justice?
Of course, that differs between the different categories of victims, but we have figures, for instance, for women as victims of violence. We have just conducted a huge survey on that, and this survey has also shown that most women, actually some 2/3 of women, are never contacting anybody, not the police and not any support service. So it's only 15% of women who were interviewed that contacted the police after the most serious incidents of physical or sexual violence which they have suffered. And that, of course, means that the response of the criminal justice system to these incidents of violence is significantly impaired.
Okay. Helgard, is this the case that you see, that women in particular don't report crime? Yes?
Yes. I think that's one of the future problems, to get victims to report and be treated well then. If they expect not to be treated well and their situation taken into account, they will not report.
Okay. Javier, do you think that people understand their rights? Do you think that they know what they're entitled to? Or do you think that they actually expect too much and it's not there for them?
I don't think that they completely understand all that they have until they need it, and there's nobody to offer them the information. I think that we should improve it.
Okay,
Somebody.
Malin.
Well, I think that the systems in place in different member states are very, very different. So a piece of legislation like this is a challenge, and the standards and minimum baselines have been put there. But as I think the real change will come about when there is also NGOs and activities going on nationally to make these baselines a reality, to implement them. And for example, we in Sweden, we have a system that I think needs improvement, but when we had these discussions in the European Parliament, victim protection in Europe, in Sweden is considered quite high standards. And we were arguing that even being afraid that putting these minimum levels too low will actually give a green card to lower standards in Sweden. So we have been fighting hard to get, for example, when it comes to women victims of gender-based violence and sexual violence, we have support structures in terms of specialized support. And we fought very hard to have specialized support services mentioned in the victim rights. It's not only women victims of violence, there are also children and other vulnerable groups. And I think this is also where we need pressure from civil society and other actors at national level. As my colleague here said from Victim Support Europe, we will have to put pressure for the member states to actually implement a good standards of victim support. And women, for example, is a group that is invisible in reporting and invisible when it comes to victim support.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about violence against women and in the program. Albin, I want to bring you back in just to ask about the kind of crimes that we're looking at. What registers as what's treated well across Europe? Are there particular types of crimes which people are able to process more easily, and others which really fall off the radar?
Well, unfortunately, it is particularly serious, severe incidents of crime that are often difficult to prove, like, of course, rape, like, of course, violence in the domestic sphere. So it is easier to prove some burglary or to prove some shoplifting than these very severe forms of violence, although there it would be particularly important for victims to be able to have access to justice and to see that the offenders are held to account. As a matter also, of course, of protecting the rights of all victims, of all women in this context. So there are important differences. Also, of course, in some instances, it is victims needing more support and more encouragement. We see that many victims of violence suffer from strong feelings of fear, of shame, of own guilt, and for that reason would need more encouragement, and for them it's even more difficult to report to the police.
Okay, Maggie, the reporting of the crime was an issue in Greece for your son. Tell us about that.
Well, straight away when I found out what had gone on and that he had been attacked quite severely, I sent the 3 young lads that were with him back to the police station, but they did find it very hard at the beginning to actually get the attention. So then I think the tour operator went along as well. And then, as I said, the process was that if you're not caught within the first 48 hours, they don't keep you there. But I want to just bring it forward a little bit more, what you've just spoken about as well, because it is important that when you find a perpetrator, especially what you've just spoken about, that you give the faith and the trust back to those victims, and that, the strong arm of the law does come down heavy on these people. Because, at the end of the day, there's a lot of criminals out there that are being convicted, and some of their, sentences that they're getting is literally a wrong impression to send back to these victims.
Okay. Albin, is this something we see, you're more familiar with a lot of the legal systems across Europe, so are there big differences in sentencing?
Yes, the legal systems really are very different, relating to different histories and legal traditions. There's still the big difference between the common law and the civil law countries, of course, and the position of victims in both systems is very different. And then, of course, there are all sorts of differences with approaches to certain areas of crime. I mean, if you look into, let's see, how stalking is dealt with, or how harassment, sexual harassment at workplace is dealt with, there are very different approaches. Even these old offenses, like, for instance, rape, are defined very differently across EU member states.
Helga, this is a key issue because cultural perceptions of what actually constitutes a crime and the severity of that crime, they vary hugely across Europe.
Yes, but I believe a legislation now, like the directive, will lead to a harmonization somehow, because then people know, okay, there it's easier, there it's worse, or whatever. And I think it's very helpful that the directive addresses unreported crimes as well. So victims have a right to get support.
Okay.
And we don't have to wait until it's proven.
Melon, what do you think? Is this something which is working?
I think that that the issue of definition of crimes and the level of penalties, it's not in my view, the European Union is not the good one to move in there.
Okay.
I'm happy that we are speaking about victims' rights and protection and support to victims, because I think that here is where there was a big lack and a big gap, and where we needed standards, and it's the right way to go to ensure rule of law. When it comes to transnational crime, there we have an EU competence, and some work has been done on trafficking and drug trafficking and people trafficking and trafficking in women and girls. So. But when it comes to the other part, where whether UK or Sweden or Greece have what they sentence for in different crime situations, I think these are part of the national competences.
Okay, Oriol Moya, Barcelona, students with us. Do you have a question?
Hi. Yeah, sure. I would like to know if you consider that most of the laws that the EU promote try to react against the aggressions that the victims suffer, but I would like to know if you consider that you should improve in preventing the damages to the people.
How do you
to
mean?
The victims.
What kind of damage?
Well, I refer to the aggressions, to the domestic violence or to the crimes.
Okay, how are we doing crime prevention? Is this something which should be part of the overall strategy, or do we just look at the result of criminal activity?
Well, I think in terms of preventing crime, for us from the Swedish Left Party, we think, for example, when it comes to gender-based violence, there's a lot we can do. There's a lot we can do to prevent.
Sure.
And we would like to see, for example, an EU strategy against violence against women focusing on preventative measures, because once the damage is done, there should be structures and policies in place for that. But we also have a big responsibility, maybe the biggest one, to actually be part of the ones that try to prevent crime. It's about, when it comes to gender equality, it's about supporting women's rights and doing away with old imaginations about women having to that it's the fault of women themselves, and the fact that we have very, very low conviction rates on rape, and for example in all the European countries. Yes. It's a shame in 2014.
And this is something which in even the last couple of weeks the United States has been really hitting the headlines as well. President Obama in particular taking this issue because of problems with football players in the States, serious violence against the wives, which is recorded on video as well. And not being able to talk about this, is this something which Europeans have to learn to do now as well? Be able to talk about the unacceptability of violence against women?
Yes, sure, because only with legislation you won't change anything. The mind must be changed, and you must be open, and you must see that it happens every day in your neighborhood. Okay. And be prepared to support, and by supporting, and I come to your question, by supporting, you might prevent worse.
Okay.
And
Albin,
help them.
Albin, what in terms of preventive measures do you see from the statistics? What kind of patterns emerge which show you something needs attention?
Well, we don't have really statistics on prevention. Hasn't been part of the survey. But what we can see is that prevention can come in when it's about education, when it's about gender roles. So I think when it is about preventing violence against women, you really have to look at different forms. Okay. For instance, we find that 55% of the women interviewed say that there have been victims of sexual harassment. And for instance, sexual harassment in work is also a matter of acceptability, whether it is something that is that is accepted by colleagues or by your chef, or it's something that immediately provokes a strong reaction from the employer. So, for instance, in this context, I think there needs more to be done to raise awareness that sexual harassment at workplace is absolutely unacceptable.
Maggie, the violence that your son suffered as well, is there a culture that you saw which was more or less, this took place in a social environment, it happens, not a big deal?
No, because how can I put it? A lot of the times I speak on, youngsters abroad, or Brits behaving badly abroad is the title. And I always say I stick up for the youngsters because you should be allowed to go out there and enjoy yourself. Even if you do get a little bit worse for wear, you should be able to come home, safe and sound. It's sometimes the culture's there, but there's different things that make it worse, like being fed too much alcohol, being taken on binge drinking, and again...
This would come under the preventive measures, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people say to me, oh, but you really hate Malia and places like that. No, I don't. It's a lovely town, and a lot of our youngsters flock there year after year, and Kos, Spain, Salou, and they're entitled to go there and have a really good time. But when they're abroad, they're vulnerable because they're not, in eyesight of their parents, so they can be supported if anything happened. When you're in the UK, because I come from the UK, if we was just down, the local high street, you can get to them quickly. That is what the problem is because you are abroad and, you are vulnerable, and especially if you're young, you're even more vulnerable.
Okay. Okay, Radoslagan from Romania. Thanks for joining us. So, you have a question?
Yes, I want to ask what can we do to improve the services available in which country of EU in this case, because in England we have translators for anything. In Greece, Romania, we don't have such a thing.
Okay, Malin, is this something that you can help with in terms of service provision? Because there's a part of this which is to do with justice, and that's a sensitive issue when it comes to member states. But the EU does a lot of social programming as well. Is this something we can separate out to say, okay, the crime part, the police deal with that, it's a member state issue, but the victim support, this is a separate issue, related but separate?
Well, I would happily see that more member states actually apply, the European funds, European social funds, etc., to, for example, invest in shelters for women and for children, victims of crime. There is, again, a member state, programming themselves what are their priorities, but it's clear that in different ways this money could be used also to support and protect and compensation, reparation for victims. And I think one should, there has to be a discussion about different systems in place to, if we speak about compensation to victims.
Okay.
And here again, I think there are some systems in some member states that are better than in others, and we should be able to learn from each other and aim for the highest possible standards.
Okay. Albin, we have a question from Eva from Poland, and she asked, to what extent do EU member states cooperate with each other in terms of fighting crimes and protecting EU citizens?
Yeah, this has been an issue of growing importance when it comes to the so-called Eurocrimes. I mean, when it is about transnational crime, organized crime, terrorism, forfeiting of money and so on.
Okay.
Of course, in the areas that we have been discussing now, like domestic violence or sexual violence or harassment at work, there is no such thing as an EU competence, at least not so far.
Okay.
And for that reason, there is not so much that is being done or can be done. Actually, most of what in the EU can be done actually relates to the rights of victims of crime, because there is a strong EU competency, and of course the Victims Directive is the best proof of that competency.
Okay, Oriel, you have a question.
Yeah, we were talking about the consensus or the problems we have to find consensus in the EU, and you said, Malin, that in some countries the legislation is better, and some countries we protect less the victims. I would like to know, and this is a concrete question for you, Malin, if would you accept to let the EU to have more control on rights of victims legislation in Sweden? You are a referent, if I can say so.
Yes, I mean, there are different views on different political strands in Sweden, but my view from the Swedish Left Party is that the criminal justice area should remain national. We have fought hard to have high standards when it comes to victims' rights and protection. We're happy to promote those internationally, European and internationally, and we will continue to do so. But it will not serve anyone if we have to lower our standards. We should, if we are, can provide a model in some areas of victim protection, we should continue to be able to do so. We have a wide network, for example, of women's shelters in Sweden. I think we have to safeguard those in terms of funding, and it's a national issue and a national decision in the Swedish Parliament to fund those shelters. I think the best example we can be to the rest of our European colleagues is to show it is possible. So, go in there, fight in your parliament, take that fight, and get the standards that victims should be entitled to.
Albin, from your research, is it possible to benchmark the best practice?
Best practice we have, of course, when it comes to victims' rights. For instance, we see very interesting projects that deal with information, targeted information of victims. We see interesting best practice when it comes to specific protection measures, for instance, of women as victims of violence. Yes, of course, a lot is developing, and I think it is definitely true what has just been said, that member states can learn from just looking what is happening on the other side of the borders. And we are also establishing now a working party that deals with hate crime victims, and is mainly about transfer of good practice from one member state to others.
Okay, I was talking earlier with Maggie, and she advocates a very common sense approach where, for example, mobile phone companies, tour operators have a role to play in how families are assisted or victims are assisted as well during this process. And I'm wondering whether, is it possible for us to introduce into consumer legislation our responsibility of assistance in this a duty of care upon the tour provider? It would be a small burden. Alan.
I must actually say that I don't know if it's the right place to see victims of crime as consumers. I know, I mean, it becomes a very concrete issue when we speak about insurance companies. I am not sure it's the right way to go. There are lots of issues to, I think, regulate when it comes to insurance companies. I think the IMCO, the committee in charge of these issues, should probably have a look and see if there is a venue there. Okay.
Albin, there's a Lord Chief Justice and a Master of the Rolls in the UK some time ago called Lord Denning, and he always looked around the courtroom and said, who can pay? Is this something we should see in our legislation, who can pay?
Victims' rights is actually not so much a matter of paying. I see, because, I mean, there are some member states where actually generic victim support services work very effectively without receiving any money from the state, like is the case, of course, in Germany. Walsering in Austria does not accept money. And actually, what we see is that these are countries where victim support services have been very strong in advocating the rights of victims, and that are advanced in that respect in their legislation. So I'm not sure that if it comes to rights of victims, one can really say that this is a matter of money being invested. It might be different, of course, when you look to certain groups of victims. Let's say violence against women. That is an area where we would need a specific and specialized support service, and that indeed will also require that states invest.
Okay. Maggie, this is something which people don't like to think about until it happens. Is this part of the problem, that our awareness is pushed to the back and we just assume everything will be okay?
Let's get real. I mean, at the end of the day, who books a holiday to get murdered, maimed, raped or missing? No one does. That would be the farthest thing from your mind when you're booking that flight. But the one thing I will go back on is that I believe that the tour operators owe you a duty of care. I believe the insurance companies owe you a duty of care. And I believe any organisation that's earning multi-million pounds out of people travelling abroad owe you a duty of care, especially when you become a victim of serious crime abroad, because they can all help you in some way or another. I'm glad to hear there's a fund, a European fund that can, that we can maybe tap into. And again, that's not advertised. It should be advertised, to everybody, so everybody's aware of it. There is a statistic out there that came out of my own meeting, which I was quite shocked actually. It came out that, I'm only talking about the UK now, that extremely serious crimes abroad, there was only 60 in the year this year. And I thought, 60? Is this all we're talking about? And we haven't got anything implemented yet for just 60 serious crime victims. I can only say about my own country, I'm quite upset about that.
I want you to say the topic just a little bit. European protection orders. Albin, European protection orders, can you explain these to us briefly?
Sorry, I didn't get the last question.
So can you explain briefly what European protection orders are?
Yes, next January 2015, two legal instruments enter into force, and the one is about protection orders relating to criminal law, and the other is protection orders based on civil law. And they both are about protecting women who are victims, or actually individuals who are victims of, let's say, domestic violence, of stalking, of other forms of repetitive victimization, against this going on when the victim moves to another member state.
So somebody's attacked in Spain, it's a case of domestic violence. The victim moves to France, and the law would not apply without the European protection order. The protection system would break down as soon as they cross the border, and this is a remedy for it. Is it going to work?
I think it depends much on the number of cases, because what we need is practice, is routines to develop. And this is difficult to foresee. The instruments as they are from a legal perspective can work. Can be quite effective. In both instances, it will be victims equipped with some sort of passport, allowing them to also claim to be protected if they move to another member state. I think it depends on whether this then actually works in the new member states. It means whether judges are aware what they have to do. Of course, do rapidly so that the protection is then in place again rapidly.
Okay, Maggie, the people that you dealt with when you were getting advice, the Foreign Office, for example, you dealing with an extradition officer who was assisting you with the recovery of your son. This is a strange combination.
Well, with my, I call him my liaison officer.
Okay.
If you become, in the UK, if you, most cases, if you obviously a case of murder, you would get allocated a liaison officer. But Robbie survived.
Okay.
But Robbie was attacked abroad, so it was a strange situation. And I actually landed up with my liaison officer, who was actually an extradition officer. Now, I'm going to be honest, through working together with him, we shared information, and we both learned off of one another. And, you can get support out there, but you have to really push for it. And I think it should be there. We should have some sort of guideline. I don't know, call it the first 48 hours, to equip that victim's family or, to say, these are the first steps you need to take, because you can't shove too much in their way at the beginning, because it'd be too much for them. They should be concentrating on, obviously, looking after the victim, etc., etc. Yeah.
Okay, Radu, do you have a point in this?
I think that a universal law for victim of crimes would be much good, because it has been said that there are 75 million of victim of crimes
in Europe per year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and I think it's a bigger number.
Malin, would the simplicity of almost a universal declaration for Europeans help with the communication issue, that it would focus minds on, first of all, the need to respond? There's a victim, there's a need to respond. And after that, they can work out the process afterwards. But at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any impetus to actually respond to the victim's needs.
Well, I think the European Protection Order was one of the first where it says you are a victim in Sweden, for example, of a violent partner, ex-partner, I hope, and you decide to move, there is a civil protection order or a criminal protection order, and you can move then to Belgium and also have that protection. So that's a step that actually. And then when it comes to EU competence, it's to ensure the freedom of movement also for people that are victims of violence. So this was one concrete step. I just want to clarify one point about the European funds. It's up for the member states to decide when they apply for European funds. So if they use them to build shelters for victimized children, it's they have to prioritize that at national level. And just to come back to your Radu, your suggestion about like a harmonized criminal justice system. I think once again the Victims' Rights Directive, which is coming into force soon, it says some baselines, and we tried to keep them as high as possible so that member states, when they are going to implement this, will actually have the best of the victims in mind. It focuses not on the situations which you have had to live through, Maggie, but it does focus the state and put it in front of certain responsibilities that are quite clearly spelled out, where there are progress when it comes to family members, when it comes to also that you don't have to report a crime to be a crime victim, for example, which is very important as well.
Okay, Albin, we've got 30 seconds now. We'll summarize. So just let me ask you, do you think there's precedent for having a universal declaration of victims' rights, a charter for victims' rights?
Well, we have a European Charter of Victims' Rights, and that's the European Fundamental Rights Charter, which in Article 47 gives every victim the right to have access to justice, which of course gives all victims the right to be protected, in particular against repeat victimization. So I think that's actually where we should look. There are similar human rights standards in other parts of the world. But as European Union citizens, I think what we first of all should think of is the Fundamental Rights Charter, which is very strong when it comes to rights of victims.
Okay, so let's summarize what we've been through today. And access to justice, a key thing, fundamental rights, this universal approach. There are aspects in place already, but the communication, the awareness of this seems to be very limited across Europe. And this is something to do with a matter of organization at the member state level, understanding what works in each state, the responsibility of each state to access funds from the European Social Fund as well to protect victims and to support victims and their families. So Europe can't do everything, but the generic system, some things are coming online. European protection system, protection orders will help across borders, but the differing legal systems as well, the civil law system, the common law system complicates this. This is not something which the EU is going to be able to resolve anytime in this generation. The level of crime across Europe, particularly for affecting women, is so high that it's almost unrecordable. And the evidence that we have for this proves that there is at least a case for benchmarking to be applied across Europe and to measure these standards and to see how effective they are across the European Union. NGOs, lobby groups, pressure needs to be applied to member states and members of parliament in the national parliaments and also at the European level as well. And specialised support has to be available for those who are victims of crime, but also their families, as in Maggie's case, where the victim himself was unable to do anything. Let me thank our guests, Malin Bjork from the United Left and European Parliament MEP, Helgard van Hüllen, Vice President of the Victim Support Europe, Maggie Hughes from UK, campaigning continually for victims' rights, Dr. Albin Dearing from Vienna and European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, and our students Javier Rodriguez, Radu Sagan and Oriel Moya. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope we all learned something. Thank you.